They said Rome would never fall. For 1,000 years, she ruled the known world, her eagles soaring across 3 continents. Her roads stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Her emperors called themselves gods. But the gods grew silent, and the eternal city began to crumble. Yet Rome somehow refused to die. Her heart kept beating, not in Italy, but in the East, in a city that would one day be called Constantinople, the fortress of faith, the last breath of empire. This is the story of the Byzantine Empire, the empire that outlived Rome. The 5th century after Christ, the Roman Empire stands on trembling legs. Plague, civil war, and corruption eat at its core. The once mighty legions are ghosts of their former glory, filled with foreign mercenaries fighting for pay, not pride. Germanic tribes, the Goths, Vandals and Franks, push against the empire's fragile borders, and the people of Rome, once conquerors of the world, now live behind crumbling walls, afraid. In 410 AD, the unthinkable Ancans, the Visigoth king, Alaric, marches into Rome itself. For 3 days, the eternal city burns. Churches ransacked, statues toppled, the screams of citizens echo through the streets once ruled by emperors. Rome, the city that had once taken the world, is taken by the world it conquered. Over the next decades, the Western Empire collapses under its own weight. One province after another falls. Gaul, Hispania, Africa. By 4756 AD, a Germanic general named Odoacer marches into Ravenna and removes the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. The Western Roman Empire is dead, but centuries earlier, a visionary emperor had seen Rome's decline and built her a new heart. His name was Constantine the Great. In 330 AD, Constantine stood on the shores of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. The city gleamed between 2 worlds, Europe and Asia, a bridge between civilizations. There he built his dream, Nova Roma, the new Rome. But the world would call it Constantinople. Constantine filled his city with treasures from across the empire. Columns from Greece, statues from Egypt, mosaics from Rome. He crowned it with a massive hippodrome for chariot races and a palace to rival any in the world. But what made Constantinople truly different was faith. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity. Once followers of Christ had been crucified, burned, hunted. Under Constantine, they became the soul of the empire. The cross replaced the eagle. Pagan temples gave way to churches. The sword and the scripture now ruled side by side. Before we continue this journey through the rise and fall of empires, remember, every story like this lives on because of you. If you believe our history deserves to be heard, take a moment to subscribe, share this documentary, and click the notification bell so you'll never miss the next chapter of Africa and the world's forgotten legacies. By the 5th century, Constantinople was no longer a city. It was a symbol. While the West was burning, the East was alive, vibrant, powerful, and devout. The people of Byzantium saw themselves as Romans, heirs to Caesar, but their hearts were shaped by the church. Greek became the tongue of scholars and priests. The emperor ruled as God's chosen representative on earth. Art became worship. Every wall, every dome, every mosaic a prayer in color and light. They called their faith orthodoxia, the true belief. To them, the empire and the faith were one, inseparable, eternal. To defend one was to defend the other. The Byzantine Empire became a civilization of the mind, preserving Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Christian theology. In its libraries were the works of Plato and Aristotle, lost to the West for centuries. In its courts, the laws of Justinian would later become the foundation of modern justice. Byzantium did not just inherit Rome's legacy, it protected it for 1,000 years. Yet Byzantium's survival was not a gift of peace. It was earned through war and will. From the moment it was built, Constantinople stood at the crossroads of empires, coveted by all. To the north, barbarian hordes. To the east, the Persians. To the south, deserts that would soon awaken under the crescent banner of Islam. But the city's walls, the Theodosian walls, were unlike anything the world had seen. Triple layers of stone, fortified towers, and deep moats stretching 4 miles. No army, no matter how vast, could break them for 1,000 years. Siege after siege came, and all were repelled. Huns, Goths, Persians, Avars, each left broken before those walls. Inside, life flourished. Merchants from Asia, Africa, and Europe crowded its markets. Scholars debated theology and science. Priests preached salvation. Generals plotted conquest. Constantinople was not just a fortress, it was the beating heart of the world. By the dawn of the 6th century, Constantinople had become the richest city on earth. Its markets overflowed with silk from China, spices from India, and gold from Africa. Its harbors were filled with ships from every known sea. Its palaces glittered with mosaics of emperors crowned in divine light. In an age when much of Europe lay in ruin, Constantinople shone like a beacon, the last city of the ancients and the first of the medieval world. Poets called it the Eye of the World. The Persians called it the City of the Caesars. The West called it the Second Rome. But even as it basked in glory, storm clouds gathered. A man now sat on the throne, brilliant, ruthless, and consumed by a single dream: to restore the lost empire of Rome. His name was Justinian. In the 6th century, the Empire of Byzantium stood unmatched, rich, powerful, and radiant beneath golden domes. But within those walls, one man dreamed of something greater. He gazed westward, to the lands once ruled by Caesar and Augustus, and vowed to reclaim them all. To him, Byzantium was not enough. The world had forgotten Rome, and he would remind it. His name was Justinian the Great. Justinian was not born in the purple. He came from a peasant village in the Balkans, born around 482 AD after the fall of the West. His uncle Justinius was an illiterate soldier who rose through the ranks of the Byzantine army to become emperor. And from the moment Justinian arrived in Constantinople, his brilliance shone. He was a scholar, a strategist, and above all, a believer that destiny could be shaped by will. He studied theology, law, and philosophy, mastering Latin and Greek alike. In the candlelight of imperial libraries, Justinian dreamed not of wealth, but of resurrection, the rebirth of Rome itself. Divided empire, the western lands in ruin, the eastern half shining. When his uncle Justin grew old and childless, he looked to the young man he had raised as a son, and so in 527 AD, Justinian became emperor of the Roman Empire in the east. The world would never be the same again. At Justinian's side stood a woman unlike any other, Theodora. Born into poverty, she had grown up in the harsh streets of Constantinople, the daughter of a bear trainer. She was an actress, and in those days that meant a life on the edges of respectability. But Theodora possessed a mind sharper than steel and a voice that could move emperors. She and Justinian met before his rise, and against all tradition, he married her. The court was scandalized, but the emperor stood firm. Better an empress from the gutter, he said, than a princess without courage. As empress, Theodora became his equal co-ruler in every sense. She spoke in councils, advised on law, and defied generals. Together, they were unstoppable, two souls united by ambition, intellect, and faith. Justinian's first mission was not war, but law. The empire's legal system was chaos, built on centuries of conflicting decrees from emperors long dead. Justinian sought to restore order, to give his people one law, one empire, one faith. Under his command, jurists compiled and purified all Roman laws into a single monumental work, the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law. It would become the foundation of European justice for the next 1400 years, influencing laws from France to modern America. Justice, Justinian declared, is the constant and perpetual will to render to each his due. In law, he rebuilt Rome's soul, but in war, he would try to rebuild its body. To the west lay ruins. Italy, Africa, Spain. Once the provinces of Rome, now carved by barbarian kings. Justinian saw not ruins, but his inheritance. He would reclaim them by fire and sword if necessary. Fluttering in sea wind, his greatest weapon was not his armies, but his general, Belisarius. A man of genius and loyalty, Belisarius led small, disciplined forces that conquered where others failed. In 533 AD, Belisarius landed in North Africa. In a matter of months, the Vandal kingdom was crushed. Carthage, once Rome's bitter rival, was Roman again. Next, Italy. Belisarius entered a war that would last nearly 2 decades against the Ostrogoths, who ruled from Ravenna. He captured Sicily, then Rome itself. For the first time in 60 years, Roman banners flew again over the Eternal City. The dream of empire was reborn, but the cost was unbearable. In 532 AD, before the wars began, Constantinople itself nearly perished. It began in the Hippodrome, where chariot fans, divided into 2 rival factions, the Blues and the Greens, erupted into chaos. What began as a sports riot turned into a full-blown rebellion. Tens of thousands flooded the streets shouting "Nika, conquer." For 5 days the capital burned. The imperial palace was under siege. Justinian's throne trembled. His advisors urged him to flee. But Theodora stood tall before the terrified court. Her words became legend. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Purple makes a fine burial shroud. Inspired by her courage, Justinian ordered Belisarius to act. The general marched into the Hippodrome with his troops. When the smoke cleared, 30,000 rebels lay dead. Constantinople was silent again, ruled by an emperor who had survived fire itself. From the ashes of the Nika revolt, Justinian built a masterpiece, Hagia Sophia, a church so vast, so radiant, that it would stand for nearly 1,500 years as one of the greatest wonders of human architecture, in golden light. When it was completed, Justinian stood beneath its soaring dome and whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." Marble from every province, gold from every treasury, and faith from every heart went into its making. Hagia Sophia was more than a building, it was the spirit of Byzantium made stone. But even as it shone, the empire was breaking under the weight of its own glory. Plague, war, and exhaustion would soon bring Byzantium to its knees. Justinian had rebuilt Rome, but at a cost that would haunt the empire forever. The dream of Justinian had come true for a moment. Rome's lost provinces were restored. The great church of Hagia Sophia gleamed like a crown of heaven. But the gods, or perhaps God, demanded a price. From the depths of Egypt, death itself rose on the wings of rats and ships, and the empire that outlasted the world's empires began to die from within. It began in the spring of 541 AD, the year history itself seemed to stop breathing. Ships arrived from Egypt carrying grain, and with it unseen passengers. Fleas carrying a deadly bacteria, Yersinia pestis. Within weeks, the streets of Constantinople were filled with the sick and the dying. The plague struck without mercy. Men went to sleep healthy and woke with black boils the size of eggs. Fever burned through the city. The air itself seemed cursed. Corpses piled faster than they could be buried. In the streets, in the harbors, even inside churches. The historian Procopius wrote, "At its height, 10,000 people died each day. The empire's heartbeat faltered. Even Justinian himself fell ill. The emperor who rebuilt Rome now lay between life and death, delirious, fevered, haunted by the sins of conquest. Somehow, he survived. But Byzantium did not escape untouched. As many as half of Constantinople's people were gone. Farms went barren, armies withered. The empire of light was plunged into shadow. When the plague finally faded, the empire it left behind was not the same. The treasuries were empty. The newly reconquered lands, Italy, North Africa, rose in rebellion. The roads of Rome's revival now ran with dust and silence. Justinian's dream of a united Roman world had turned into a burden too heavy to bear. The wars that once brought glory now drained the empire's lifeblood. From Spain to Syria, the frontiers cracked. and through those cracks, new forces began to rise. In the west, the Lombards invaded Italy. In the east, the Sassanid Persians grew bold again. Byzantium stood exhausted, its emperor aged and haunted. When Justinian died in 565 AD, he left behind a legacy of brilliance and ruin, an empire more magnificent than ever, and yet dangerously fragile. The age of conquest was over. The age of survival had begun. The decades that followed were filled with endless war. Byzantium fought for its very existence. The Persians struck deep into Syria, Armenia, and Anatolia, burning cities, enslaving thousands. By 602 AD, the empire was torn by rebellion. A general named Phocas seized power in blood, murdering Emperor Maurice and his sons. The empire collapsed into chaos. Constantinople's streets ran red once more. The Persians saw their chance, and they took it. By the early 7th century, Persian armies had captured Jerusalem itself, taking with them the most sacred relic in Christendom, the true cross. To Byzantium, it was not just a military defeat, it was a spiritual catastrophe. The empire of faith had lost the very symbol of its salvation. Before we continue this journey through the rise and fall of empires, remember, every story like this lives on because of you. If you believe our history deserves to be heard, take a moment to subscribe, share this documentary, and click the notification bell so you'll never miss the next chapter of Africa and the world's forgotten legacies. In 610 AD, a new emperor rose, Heraclius. He inherited a dying empire, bankrupt, divided, and besieged on all sides. But Heraclius was not a man of despair. He was a man of faith and courage, one who believed Byzantium could be reborn again. Against all odds, he rebuilt the army, reformed the government, and inspired a new sense of purpose. He called his soldiers the Army of Christ and marched east to face the Persians head-on. The campaign was brutal, fought through mountains, deserts, and years of starvation. But Heraclius never yielded. In 627 AD, at the Battle of Nineveh, he crushed the Persian army in a stunning victory. The enemy king fled. The true cross was recovered. For a moment, the world believed Byzantium had been saved. The empire and the faith had triumphed once more. But even as Heraclius returned in triumph, a new power stirred in the sands of Arabia. A prophet was preaching unity and submission to one God, Allah. His followers called their new faith Islam. Within a generation, that faith would spread faster than any empire in history. The armies of Islam, driven by zeal and destiny, would soon descend upon the ancient lands of Byzantium and Persia alike. For the empire that had survived plague, heresy, and war, a new storm was coming. The age of empires was ending. The age of faith was about to begin. Byzantium had survived the unthinkable. It had outlasted plague, rebellion, and the wrath of Persia. The true cross was home again. The empire had found hope. But even as Heraclius prayed in the Hagia Sophia, a new force was awakening beyond the desert horizon, a faith that would change the world forever. In the vast deserts of Arabia, far from the marble of empires, tribes had lived divided for centuries by blood, by gods, by endless feuds. But in the early 7th century, one man united them. His name was Muhammad. He preached of one God, not many, of justice, equality, and submission to the divine will, and his message spread like fire on the wind. By the time Heraclius celebrated his victory in Jerusalem, Muhammad had already transformed Arabia. And when the prophet died in 632 AD, his followers were not just a people, they were a movement. A new empire was being born, one not built on marble or conquest alone, but on faith. While Byzantium rejoiced, its strength was an illusion. The plague had emptied its fields. The wars with Persia had broken its armies. The people were tired, divided by heresies, languages, and taxes. Then in 634 AD, the storm struck. From the desert came armies united under the banner of Islam. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, sent them forth. To the north they rode, toward the lands of Syria and Palestine, lands Byzantium had only just reclaimed. At first, the Byzantines dismissed them as raiders. But at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 AD, the truth became clear. In 6 days of fury, the Byzantine army, once the greatest on earth, was shattered. The survivors fled. Syria was lost forever. The caliphate had arrived. In less than a decade, the impossible happened. Jerusalem fell again, this time to the armies of Islam. Egypt followed soon after, and Persia, Byzantium's eternal rival, was utterly destroyed. 1,000 years of empire had ended in the blink of an age, and in Constantinople, Heraclius, once hailed as savior, watched his world dissolve. He had once carried the true cross in triumph. Now he could barely carry his own body. Old, broken, and defeated, he died in 641 AD, whispering the name of Christ as the muezzin's call echoed beyond the sea. What rose from the ashes of these empires was not merely new, it was revolutionary. Islam united half the known world, from the sands of Arabia to the gates of India, from Egypt to Spain. Its scholars preserved the wisdom of Greece, its merchants connected continents, its armies reshaped destiny. And while the caliphate rose, Byzantium endured, smaller, humbler, but alive. It became the guardian of Christian heritage, a bridge between ancient Rome and the medieval world yet to come. In this new age, power no longer rested in marble palaces alone. It lived in hearts, in prayers, and in the written word. Faith had become the new empire. From the ashes of plague and war, the Byzantine Empire stood as a flickering flame, no longer the ruler of the world, but the keeper of its memory. Hagia Sophia still glowed beneath the sun, its dome a mirror of heaven, a reminder that even in the darkest times, civilization does not die, it transforms. Empires fall, faiths rise. But the story of Byzantium, the bridge between worlds, would endure for 1,000 years more, until the last wall fell and the torch passed to a new empire, the Ottoman world. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood unbroken, a beacon of light in an age of darkness, the heir of Rome, the guardian of the faith. But by the 15th century, its light was flickering, surrounded by shadows, and at last, the walls of the eternal city would face their final dawn. The Byzantine Empire was now a memory. Its vast provinces, Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, Greece, all gone. Only Constantinople remained, a ghost of Rome, surrounded by the rising power of the Ottomans. Outside its walls, a young sultan dreamed of conquest. Mehmed II, just 21 years old, brilliant, relentless, and certain he was chosen by destiny. He vowed to take the city that had defied Islam for 8 centuries, to make it his capital and his legacy. In the spring of 1453, his armies appeared before the Theodosian walls, 200,000 strong. Behind them came the thunder of something new, massive bronze cannons, each capable of shattering the stones of Rome itself. Inside the walls, only 7,000 stood to defend the city. Greeks, Venetians, Genoese, the last defenders of a dying empire. And at their head stood Constantine XI Palaiologos, the final emperor of Rome. He knew what awaited. He knew no help would come from the west, but he refused to surrender. In his final address to his soldiers, he said, "Brothers, we are not fighting for wealth or glory, but for faith, for freedom, and for this holy city." For 7 weeks the siege raged. Day after day the walls were battered. Night after night, the defenders rebuilt what they could. The sea gates burned, the towers crumbled. Still, Constantinople held, until dawn, May 29, 1453, when the final assault began. The last emperor threw down his imperial regalia and charged into the breach with his men. He was never seen again. The line of Roman emperors, unbroken since Augustus, ended in blood and dust. When the fighting ceased, the banner of the crescent rose above the walls. Constantinople had fallen. The Sultan dismounted at the Hagia Sophia. He entered in silence, not as a destroyer, but as a conqueror of destiny. He gazed upon the vast dome and whispered, "Be still, for this house shall live again." The great cathedral became a mosque, yet Mehmed preserved it. Its mosaics, its beauty, its memory. The conqueror of Rome became its guardian. The city of Constantine was reborn as Istanbul, the bridge between worlds. The fall of Constantinople shook the earth. In Europe, it marked the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance. Greek scholars fled west, carrying the knowledge of Aristotle and Plato, the manuscripts of ancient science and philosophy. Their wisdom ignited the rebirth of art, reason, and exploration. In the East, the Ottoman Empire rose as a new superpower, commanding the crossroads of civilization. From Istanbul flowed trade, astronomy, architecture, and poetry, a new chapter in human history. Thus, the fall of one world became the birth of another. Rome had fallen, but its light had merely changed form. Empires rise, empires fall, but the dream of Rome endures. From the marble of Constantinople to the domes of Istanbul, from the Latin of monks to the art of Florence, the spirit of Byzantium flows through every age that followed. For in every empire that builds, every faith that prays, every city that stands between worlds, there beats the same eternal heart. Rome did not die on the walls of Constantinople. It lives still in the cities, in the churches, in the stories we tell about who we are and who we once dared to be. 4053 was not the end. It was a transformation. The last emperor had fallen, the city renamed, but the legacy of Rome of Byzantium lived on, not in empire or army, but in memory, in knowledge, and in faith. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the world. To the Christian kingdoms of Europe, it was a wound, a sign that the old order was gone. To the Islamic world, it was a triumph, the fulfillment of a prophecy, the crowning of a new age. But everywhere, people understood one truth: the world had changed forever. The trade routes to the east were cut, and so explorers turned west. In that single moment of loss, the age of discovery was born. The fall of Constantinople had set the course for Columbus, for Vasco da Gama, for the expansion of the world itself. From the ashes of Byzantium came a new light, a flood of scholars, thinkers, and artists, carrying the soul of the ancient world. They brought Aristotle and Plato, Ptolemy and Galen, manuscripts once thought lost forever. They carried these treasures to Italy, to Florence, to Venice, to Rome, and there, Europe awoke. The Renaissance was not born in the West, it was reborn from the East. From the memory of Byzantium, from the dust of Constantinople. For the Ottomans, the conquest of Constantinople was not an ending, it was a beginning. Mehmed II transformed the fallen city into his capital, Istanbul, a jewel of empire, art, and learning. He welcomed Christians and Jews, built schools, mosques, and libraries. From his rule would rise Suleiman the Magnificent, an emperor whose reign rivaled Caesar's and Constantine's. Under him, East and West met in splendor, a new Rome under the crescent. The world had not lost civilization. It had simply changed its name. For centuries, the memory of Byzantium lingered like incense. Its art shaped the cathedrals of Europe. Its theology defined Christian thought. Its diplomacy, its laws, its vision of empire, they lived on in every kingdom that came after. In Moscow, princes called themselves Tsars, Caesars, and named their city the Third Rome. The torch had passed eastward, but the dream remained the same. Rome had fallen, yet still, it lived in the minds of men. Every empire is mortal, but ideas are not. Rome became Byzantium. Byzantium became Istanbul, and from their ruins rose the modern world. Today, Istanbul stands where East meets West, where the call to prayer echoes through ancient Roman walls. It is not a ruin, it is a mirror, reflecting everything civilization has ever been. Rome never truly ended. It transformed into new faiths, new nations, new dreams. Every city that builds upon its past carries a fragment of that eternal light. And as long as men remember the name of Constantinople, Rome lives on. Empires fall, but stories endure. The marble may crumble, the banners may fade, but the memory of Rome, of Constantinople, lives in us all. Because history is not the past, it is a mirror, reflecting who we are and what we choose to become. So remember the lessons of empires, the glory, the fall, the rebirth, and carry their light forward. If you believe history still matters, if you believe these stories should never fade, then keep them alive with us. Subscribe to the channel, like this video to support historical storytelling. Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps history alive. Turn on notifications, more forgotten stories await. History never ends, it only waits to be told again.